If we go over to the next category, we can see that the numbers increased between 2007 and 2014, which means that not everyone is jumping over to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? It's not that theists are all of a sudden becoming atheists, but we do see a move on that spectrum, at least towards agnosticism. But again, for those who maybe began in the center towards agnosticism, we do see them too sliding to atheism, right? Where we have an increase in atheism from 5% in 2007 to 9% in 2014. But if you take a look at the media that I've provided, you'll note that a lot of these numbers actually might be higher than are what are reported, because many people are afraid or worried about the potential retribution or pushback they will get if they were to admit that they are an atheist. And this comes from the unfortunate belief that morality only can come from religion, right? That you can only be a good person if you have religious belief. And so because we associate those two things as necessarily connected, we think then that if you admit to not being religious or not believing in God, then that somehow implies that you must be a bad person, right? And so because of these connections, right, people often are afraid to come out of what they might call the atheist closet, right? This happens a lot, again, in the public sphere as well. You'll note that as far as the history of U.S. presidency concerns, we have never had a president who was anything but, openly, fervently religious. The closest we came was in 2016 Democratic primaries, where we had our first Jewish nominee, right, or potential candidacy in Bernie Sanders. But again, right, that is very rare, and we have never seen someone raise to the level of a serious candidate who admitted to being an atheist, right? So it's still considered, again, to be somewhat of a taboo sort of set of beliefs. So I've included some other statistics here for you in addition to the Pew Center Research Report, because it's helpful to understand how these beliefs differ across different age ranges as well as different professions, right? So you'll note here in the bottom left chart that belief in God, right, has started to decrease for those between the ages of 18 to 29, right? So this is the idea that they never doubted the existence of God, but those numbers for the younger people are going down, which means they are starting to doubt the existence of God. We'll see that the numbers are, relatively stable through the 30 to 49-year-olds, the 50 to 64-year-olds, and then the 65 and over. What's interesting, though, is when you look at this data more closely, you'll notice the common trends. One is separated on gender. So it is the case that women tend to be more religious than men, and that religiosity, or one's commitment to your religion, is at its highest between the ages of 20 and 35. And the idea here is that this is typically around the age when people are having children. And again, because of the association between religion and morality, it is thought that, okay, if you're going to raise children, you want to instill good values in them, that is when people might become more entrenched in their religious tradition in order to educate their children about those values. You might think that religiosity would be at its peak as people get older, right? As they are perhaps approaching the end of their life. But interestingly, that's not the case. We actually start to see belief and religiosity decrease as people get older. And I'm not sure why that is. I mean, we could definitely speculate about a few things, but right, some interesting statistics to note. On the right-hand side here, right, we have a comparison between the scientific community and the general population, right? So it's important to note that, again, you do not have to be an atheist if you are a scientist, but there is still a large disparity between the religious commitment of scientific communities towards the general public, right? So of course the general population is going to be more religious than the scientific community, but that doesn't mean, again, that there are no scientists who are religious, right? Showing that there is a compatibility between these two things. And again, we might try to think about why this is, right? What is perhaps the reason? Is it a certain level of education, right, that correlates to religious belief? Is it, looking at just whatever one's pre-existing beliefs were before they entered into a certain discipline, right? There are lots of things that we can look at here. So to continue on with this last set of numbers, right, we have in our textbook the idea that 51% of scientists believe in a deity or higher power. So you might be surprised at how high that is, right, for the scientific community. But again, relative to the general population, right, it's much lower. So between 80 and 95% of Americans believe in a higher deity or power. So here I have a couple of quotes from some very well-known scientists. So we have astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who started the first iteration of the show Cosmos, of which Neil deGrasse Tyson recently did a remake. And he said science is not only compatible with spirituality, is a profound source of spirituality, right? So here we're talking about someone whose job is to study space, right, and look out into the world. And for him, he saw that as a source of religiosity or spirituality, in the sense that, right, we're looking at the enormity of the universe.